Welcome to Private Stories, where people discover who they really are. For most of my adult life, I believed something simple about love. Love was not just a feeling. Love was something you built carefully, like a house that grew stronger brick by brick if both people kept working on it. For more than a decade, I lived by that belief. My name is Tobias Reynolds, and for 11 years I gave everything I had to my marriage. My wife Melanie was the center of my world. She was not the kind of beauty that turned heads in a crowded bar. Her beauty was quieter. Long blonde hair that fell softly over her shoulders. Clear blue eyes that seemed calm and thoughtful. A gentle smile that once made my heart beat faster every time she looked at me. When we first met in Portland, I thought I had found the safest place in the world. Her voice had warmth in it. The kind of voice that made a bad day feel manageable. The kind of voice that could make a simple apartment feel like home. I built my life around that voice. Around her. I worked harder, planned carefully, dreamed about a future that always included the two of us growing older together. To me, we were partners. A team. Two people facing whatever life decided to throw at us. At least that was what I believed. Until the night everything collapsed. It happened on a Tuesday evening in early autumn. Nothing about that day had felt unusual. I left the office later than usual after a long meeting and drove home through the quiet streets of Seattle. The sky was already dark and the air carried the sharp smell of rain. When I stepped inside the house, the familiar scent of lavender and vanilla drifted through the hallway. Melanie loved candles. She said they made the house feel warm. I kicked off my shoes near the door and loosened the knot of my tie. For a moment I felt relief. Home. I was about to call out her name when I heard her voice coming from the living room. At first I assumed she was talking to one of her friends. Her tone sounded casual, almost relaxed. Then I heard my name, and everything inside me went still. Tobias just does not get it. The words floated down the hallway. I froze, my hand resting against the wall, my heart suddenly beating harder. I told myself not to listen. Everyone complains sometimes. Marriage was complicated. But then she laughed quietly and continued. I cannot stand him anymore. Every little thing he does irritates me. He is so predictable. So boring. Sometimes I feel like I am suffocating in that house. The hallway felt colder. My chest tightened as if the air had suddenly disappeared. Each word landed heavier than the last. I wanted to believe I misunderstood. Maybe she was joking. Maybe it was sarcasm. But there was something in her voice. A tired honesty. The kind that only appears when someone finally stops pretending. I should have walked into the room. I should have asked what she meant. Instead, I stayed where I was, hidden in the shadow of the hallway, my hand gripping the door frame so tightly my fingers hurt. Then her voice dropped lower, almost a whisper, and what she said next destroyed the last piece of certainty I had about my life. I have not loved him in years. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs. I just do not know how to leave. He is comfortable, reliable. But I do not want reliable. For a moment I forgot how to breathe. The woman I had loved for 11 years, the woman I thought loved me, was describing me like I was nothing more than a piece of furniture. Something useful, something convenient, something that made life easier, but not something she actually wanted. I stood there in silence while my entire marriage collapsed around me. Part of me wanted to storm into the room. Demand answers. Ask how long she had felt this way. Ask why she had never said anything. Another part of me wanted to disappear completely. Erase the last decade. Pretend I had never heard those words. But instead, I did something I never imagined I would have the strength to do. I turned around quietly, walked down the hallway, and went into our bedroom. The room looked exactly the same as it always had. Neatly made bed. Soft yellow lamp glowing on the nightstand. A framed wedding photo sitting on the dresser. I opened the closet and pulled out a dark travel bag. My hands were shaking as I started packing clothes. A few shirts, jeans, a jacket. Enough for several days. Maybe a week. My mind felt strangely empty, like my body was moving on its own. When I zipped the bag shut, my eyes drifted back to the wedding photo. Melanie stood beside me in a white dress, her blonde hair shining in the sunlight, her arms wrapped around my shoulders, her smile bright and full of promise. I stared at that photo for a long time, feeling like the biggest fool alive. Had it all been a lie? Had she already fallen out of love back then? Or had the feeling simply faded slowly while I kept believing everything was perfect? I forced myself to look away. From the photo. From the past. From the man in that picture who still believed his marriage was unbreakable. Then I picked up the bag and walked back toward the living room. From inside I heard her laugh. A light, carefree laugh. As if she had not just destroyed my heart without even realizing I was standing 10 feet away. I stopped at the doorway for a second. Then I stepped inside. Melanie sat on the couch with her phone pressed to her ear, her legs tucked beneath her, still smiling. The moment she saw me, the smile disappeared. Her blue eyes widened. Tobias. She blinked in confusion. What are you doing? I did not answer right away. I simply stood there holding the bag, watching her, waiting for the moment she understood. The moment she realized. I had heard everything, and when that realization finally appeared in her eyes, I spoke the only sentence that felt honest in that moment. I hope you find what you are looking for, Melanie. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. I did not wait. I turned, walked to the front door, and left the house, without looking back. The night air hit my face the moment I stepped outside. Cold, sharp, almost cleansing, yet I barely noticed it. My mind was still trapped inside the house, replaying her words again and again. I have not loved him in years. Each repetition cut deeper than the last. I walked down the driveway slowly, like a man who had forgotten how movement worked. My car stood under the streetlight at the curb. The pale yellow glow reflected on the windshield. For years that car had carried me home every evening, back to the life I believed was real. Now it felt like an escape vehicle. I opened the door and tossed the bag onto the passenger seat. When I sat down, my hands stayed frozen on the steering wheel. My knuckles turned pale, my breathing uneven. The quiet of the street felt unnatural. Somewhere far away, a dog barked. A car passed at the end of the block, but everything around me seemed distant, muted, like I was watching the world through glass. I should have felt rage. That was what people always talked about after betrayal. Anger, fury, the desire to scream. Instead, there was only emptiness, a heavy, hollow feeling spreading slowly through my chest, as if something vital inside me had simply disappeared. 11 years. 11 years loving someone who secretly wished I would vanish from her life. The worst part was not the words themselves. The worst part was realizing how blind I had been. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel. Memories started surfacing whether I wanted them or not. Small moments, tiny details I had ignored. The way Melanie had stopped reaching for my hand when we walked together. The way she often sighed quietly when I talked about my day. The way she spent more time staring at her phone, sometimes smiling at messages she never shared with me. Back then I told myself it was normal. Marriage changes. People grow comfortable. Routine replaces excitement. But now those memories looked different. Now they looked like warning signs. Signs I had chosen not to see. I started the engine. The sound filled the quiet street. For a moment I hesitated. I had nowhere to go. Most of our friends were mutual. Showing up at their homes in the middle of the night with a travel bag would invite questions I was not ready to answer. My parents lived 3 states away in Arizona. And a hotel. A hotel would make everything feel too real, too final. So instead I did the only thing that felt possible. I drove. The city streets were almost empty. Streetlights stretched along the road like glowing markers guiding me away from the life I had just left behind. Rain began to fall lightly against the windshield. The rhythmic sound of the wipers filled the silence. Time passed strangely. Minutes felt like hours. At some point I realized I had reached the waterfront. The dark water stretched endlessly into the night. Waves crashed slowly against the rocks below. I pulled into an empty parking lot overlooking the bay. Then I turned off the engine. Silence returned instantly. I leaned back in the seat staring through the windshield at the black ocean. For the first time since leaving the house, I allowed myself to truly feel what had happened. The betrayal, the humiliation, the crushing realization that the person I trusted most had been pretending for years. My throat tightened, but no tears came, only that same hollow feeling, deep and quiet. A sudden vibration broke the stillness. My phone lit up in the darkness. Melanie. Her name glowed on the screen. For a long moment I simply stared at it. Part of me wanted to ignore the call. Another part wanted answers. Against my better judgment, I pressed the button. Hello. Her voice sounded different. Not confident. Not calm. Uncertain. Tobias. Where are you? I said nothing. The silence stretched between us like a tightening wire. She exhaled softly. Look, I do not know what is going on, but you just left. Are you coming back? My jaw tightened. I heard you. My voice sounded quieter than I expected. What? Pause. I heard everything, Melanie. Everything. Silence exploded through the line, so heavy I could almost hear her thinking. Then her voice returned softer. Tobias, I did not mean. Do not lie to me. The words came out sharper this time. She stopped speaking immediately. Another long silence followed. Finally she asked, Where are you? For a moment I considered telling her, giving her a chance to explain, to apologize, to promise things would change. But deep down I already knew something important. Those words she spoke earlier were not said in anger. They were said in truth. And truth rarely disappears after a conversation. So instead of answering, I ended the call. The screen went dark again. And for the first time in years, I accepted something I had refused to see. I had spent more than a decade loving someone who had stopped loving me a long time ago. And I was not going to waste another year pretending that was enough. The rest of the night passed slowly. I never left the car. The ocean kept moving in the darkness. Endless. Unbothered by human heartbreak. At some point I checked my phone again. 8 missed calls. 3 messages. The first message was simple. Where are you? The second sounded more urgent. Please come home, we need to talk. The third made my stomach twist. You are being dramatic, Tobias, let's just be adults about this. Dramatic. A quiet, bitter laugh escaped my throat. I had overheard my wife confess she had not loved me for years. And somehow I was the one overreacting. I dropped the phone onto the passenger seat. My hands rubbed over my face slowly. Exhaustion was creeping into my bones. But sleep was impossible. My body was running on adrenaline. My mind replaying every memory of our marriage. Searching desperately for the exact moment everything began to die. The first pale light of morning slowly appeared over the horizon. The dark water turned silver. Birds began circling above the shore. The world was waking up. And I realized something. I could not sit here forever. But one thing was certain. I was not going back home. So I started the engine again. And drove. Without a destination. Just following the empty highway as it carried me away from the life I used to know. The highway stretched ahead of me like a thin gray ribbon disappearing into the morning haze. The farther I drove, the quieter my mind became. Not peaceful. Just numb. The kind of numbness that arrives when pain has already done its worst and there is nothing left to shock you. Small towns passed by the windows. Gas stations. Closed shops. Lonely intersections with flickering traffic lights. The world around me continued moving exactly as it always had. People starting their day. Opening stores. Pouring coffee. Completely unaware that my entire life had collapsed only a few hours earlier. At some point my stomach reminded me I had not eaten since the previous afternoon. The dull ache pulled me out of my thoughts. Up ahead I noticed a small roadside diner sitting near the edge of a quiet town. A faded neon sign buzzed weakly above the roof. Half of the letters were burned out. The parking lot was mostly empty. Normally, I would have driven past a place like that. But right now, I needed something simple. Food, coffee, and a place to sit where no one knew who I was. I pulled into the lot and shut off the engine. For a moment, I stayed in the car staring at the building. My reflection looked back from the side window. Messy dark hair, wrinkled shirt, eyes that looked older than they had the day before. I barely recognized the man staring back at me. Finally, I stepped out and walked inside. A bell above the door chimed softly. The diner smelled like coffee grease and warm syrup. A few early customers sat scattered around the room. A truck driver near the window. An elderly couple sharing toast. The quiet hum of conversation blended with the low music from an old radio behind the counter. I slid onto one of the stools. My body felt heavier than usual, as if the night had drained something essential from me. A waitress appeared almost immediately. She looked to be in her 50s with short gray streaks in her brown hair and tired but kind eyes. Without asking, she poured a cup of coffee and placed it in front of me. Rough night. She raised one eyebrow slightly. I let out a dry breath of laughter. You could say that. She nodded like she had heard that answer many times before. Well, coffee helps most problems. At least the temporary ones. She slid a menu toward me and walked away without asking more questions. I appreciated that. Explaining my situation to a stranger would only make it feel more real. I stared down at the menu for several minutes without actually reading it. The noise of the diner felt distant. Forks tapping plates, coffee cups clinking, the low hum of casual conversation. Everything seemed so ordinary, so stable, and yet my own life felt like shattered glass. I should have been waking up at home right now, making coffee in our kitchen, listening to Melanie move around upstairs getting ready for work. Instead, I was sitting alone in a forgotten diner trying to understand how 11 years had vanished overnight. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. For a moment, I ignored it, but eventually curiosity won. I pulled it out and looked. Another message. From Melanie. Please, Tobias. At least let me explain. Explain what? That she had been pretending. That every I love you during the past few years had been empty words. That she had stayed only because leaving required more courage than she had. My jaw tightened. I locked the phone and shoved it back into my pocket. I was not ready to hear her explanation. Maybe I never would be. The waitress returned carrying a small coffee pot. She refilled my cup before speaking. You look like someone who needs real food, not just caffeine. Pancakes or eggs? I blinked at her. Pancakes, I guess. She scribbled something on her notepad. Good choice. People make better decisions after pancakes. Then she walked away again. I stared at my reflection in the large window beside the counter. Sunlight had begun climbing higher into the sky. My face looked pale. Exhausted. There were faint shadows beneath my eyes. For the first time in years, I had no idea what my day was supposed to look like. The front door chimed again behind me. Another customer walking in. I barely noticed. My mind was drifting through memories again. Searching. Trying to understand. Then I heard a voice that made my stomach drop instantly. Tobias. Every muscle in my body tightened. Slowly, I turned around on the stool. And there she was. Melanie stood just inside the entrance. Her blonde hair was slightly messy, like she had rushed out without thinking. She wore a light gray coat thrown hastily over her clothes. Her blue eyes searched the room until they landed on me. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. The entire diner seemed to fall quiet, like the world itself was waiting to see what would happen next. I turned back toward my coffee slowly. How did you find me? My voice remained calm, though my chest felt tight. She stepped closer. You always drive when you are upset. She glanced around the diner before returning her gaze to me. I just followed the highway until I saw your car. I did not respond. She hesitated for a moment, then slid onto the stool across from me. Her hands folded together on the counter. You disappeared, Tobias. Her voice carried frustration mixed with something else. Maybe worry. I woke up and you were gone. I took a slow sip of coffee before answering. I did not disappear. I walked away. She flinched slightly. The waitress appeared again carrying a plate of pancakes and set it in front of me. Her eyes moved between Melanie and me for half a second. Then she quietly walked away. The tension between us filled the small space. Melanie leaned forward slightly. "You heard me on the phone last night." "Yes." The word left my mouth calmly. Too calmly. She swallowed. "I was just venting. Couples go through rough phases. Sometimes people say things they do not mean." I tilted my head, slightly studying her. "How long has our rough phase lasted?" Her lips parted. But no answer came. I continued. "You said you have not loved me in years, Melanie. That is not a rough phase. That is the truth." Her eyes shifted away. Guilt flashed across her expression. My chest tightened again. All this time, I kept trying to be a better husband, trying to build a future, while you were already gone. She rubbed her temple with her fingers. "I did not know how to tell you." I let out a humorless laugh. "So you decided not telling me was easier. You just let me keep loving you." Her face tightened with discomfort. "I never wanted to hurt you, but you did." The words landed heavily between us. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The low music from the diner radio filled the silence. Finally, she reached across the counter and placed her hand gently over mine. The contact surprised me. I looked at her. For the first time that morning, I saw something raw in her eyes. Not anger, not frustration, fear. "I do not want to lose you." Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. The sentence stunned me. Of all the things she could have said, that was not what I expected. Slowly, I pulled my hand away. "You do not want to lose me, but you also do not love me." She hesitated. "I do not know what we have anymore, Tobias, but I do not want it to end like this." A quiet, bitter laugh escaped my chest. "You do not want it to end because ending things is messy, because it is uncomfortable, not because you actually want me." She did not argue. Her silence answered everything. I pushed the plate of pancakes away. Suddenly, I had no appetite at all. I reached into my pocket and placed several bills on the counter. Then I stood up. Melanie looked up at me quickly. "Tobias, wait. Can we at least talk about this?" "No." The word came out firm. Final. I turned and walked toward the door, leaving her sitting there in stunned silence. The bell chimed again as I stepped outside. The morning sunlight felt brighter than before. But inside me something had changed. Something important. For the first time since hearing her confession, I felt something close to control. And I knew one thing with complete certainty. I was never going to be someone's comfortable option again. The sunlight outside the diner felt warmer than it had a few minutes earlier. But the warmth did not reach my chest. Inside me, everything still felt cold and hollow. I walked slowly across the parking lot toward my car. Gravel crunched under my shoes. The quiet town around me was fully awake now. Cars passing. People walking into nearby stores. Life continuing normally, while mine had just been torn apart. I reached the car and placed my hand on the door handle. For a moment, I simply stood there staring at my reflection in the window. The man looking back at me seemed unfamiliar. Dark hair slightly disordered. Stubble along my jaw. Tired gray eyes. Shoulders slightly hunched like he had been carrying something heavy for far too long. Was this who I had become? A man so used to being tolerated that he no longer noticed when love had quietly disappeared. My jaw tightened. No, I refused to let that thought define me. Footsteps behind me interrupted the silence. Then her voice again. "Tobias, please." I closed my eyes briefly before turning around. Melanie stood several steps away. Her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her blonde hair moved slightly in the breeze. Her expression held a strange mixture of panic and frustration. "I do not understand." She shook her head slowly. "Why are you making this so final? We can talk. We can fix this." I studied her quietly. "Figure what out?" My voice remained calm. "How to pretend for another 5 years. How to make it easier for you to stay miserable." She flinched. Her throat moved as she swallowed. I never wanted to hurt you, but you did. I ran a hand through my hair slowly. You think this is only about what you said last night. This is about the years you looked at me like I was part of the furniture. The years you let me believe something that was never real. She bit her lower lip and looked away. I was not trying to be cruel. No, you were trying to be comfortable. Her head snapped up. A flash of anger appeared in her blue eyes. And what about you? Do you really think you were perfect? You think I was the only one unhappy? A short bitter laugh escaped me. No, but at least I was not lying to you. The words landed hard. Her shoulders slowly dropped. For the first time since I had known her, she looked small, fragile. For years I had seen Melanie as the center of my life, the person everything revolved around. But standing here in a quiet diner parking lot, I realized something that should have been obvious long ago. She was never my entire world. She was only a part of it. And now she was a part that no longer belonged. She inhaled slowly. So what happens now? I glanced toward the road stretching out beyond the town, then back at her. Now I figure out who I am without you. Her breath caught slightly. For the first time she seemed to understand. I was not waiting for her to fix anything. I was not asking for permission to leave. I was simply done. Without another word, I opened the car door and got inside. The engine started with a low rumble. In the rearview mirror, I could see her still standing in the parking lot, frozen, watching. For a brief moment, guilt tried to creep into my chest, but I pushed it away. Some endings are painful, but they are still necessary. I pressed the gas pedal. The car rolled forward, then turned onto the road, and I did not look back again. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, mile after mile of open road. The steady hum of the engine filled the silence where Melanie's voice used to live. I drove without any clear destination. Towns appeared and disappeared. Gas stations, fields, long quiet highways cutting through forests. With every mile, something inside my chest felt lighter. Not healed, but lighter. The weight of pretending. The weight of trying to save something that had already died. That weight was finally gone. Several hours later, I stopped at a small gas station near the edge of a quiet rural town. The place looked like it had not changed in decades. An old metal sign above the pumps. A rusty vending machine buzzing near the entrance. I stepped inside and grabbed a bottle of water and a protein bar. As I walked toward the counter, I noticed another man standing nearby flipping through a magazine. He looked to be around 60. Weathered hands, silver hair, thoughtful eyes. For some reason he looked up and studied me. Then he nodded slightly. You look like a man who has been driving for a long time. His voice was rough but calm. I shrugged lightly. Something like that. Trying to outrun something. A small dry laugh escaped me. Or maybe just trying to figure out where I am supposed to go. He set the magazine down and leaned on the counter. That is the thing about leaving. You do not always know where you are going. Sometimes that is the best part. His words stayed in my mind long after I left the store. Back in the car, I stared at the open road again. For years, every decision in my life had been tied to someone else. Where we lived, what we planned, what the future looked like. Now, for the first time in a decade, I was free. The thought was terrifying, but also strangely exciting. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts. My finger paused on a name I had not called in years. Lucas, my older brother. Work, marriage, distance. All of it had slowly pushed us apart. But if there was anyone who would understand, it was him. I pressed call. The phone rang twice before he answered. Tobias. His voice sounded sleepy, then suddenly more alert. Man, it has been a while. Everything okay? I hesitated, looking out through the windshield at the road stretching toward the horizon. No, I admitted quietly, but I think I am finally ready to figure out what okay actually looks like. Lucas did not ask too many questions. He simply listened. After a moment he spoke. You know, you do not have to figure everything out alone. You can come stay here for a while. No pressure. Just a place to breathe. For the first time in days, I felt something close to relief. Later that evening, I pulled into the driveway of his house in a quiet town in Colorado. The sun was setting behind the mountains. Lucas stood outside leaning against his truck. When I stepped out of the car, he looked me over carefully, then nodded. "Good to see you, little brother." Something in my chest loosened. He did not ask if I was fine. He did not force me to explain everything. He simply handed me a cold beer and we sat together on the porch. The warm evening air filled with the sound of distant cicadas. For the first time in a long time, there was no tension, no expectations, just quiet peace. After a while, Lucas finally spoke. "Do you regret it?" I took a slow sip of my drink, thinking carefully. Did I regret leaving? Leaving the house? Leaving the life I had built? Leaving the woman I once loved? No, I regret not seeing the truth sooner. But leaving? No, that was the first honest thing I have done for myself in years. Lucas nodded slowly. Good. And for the first time since that night, I truly believed it. I did not know exactly what my future looked like, but it no longer felt like a prison. Instead, it felt like an open road stretching endlessly ahead. And this time, I was finally ready to see where it would lead. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Visit our channel for interesting and intriguing stories.